I decided to play with ChatGPT4o and see if it could calculate the mean for a set of data. When I played with ChatGPT in the past, it did a terrible job of trying to calculate the mean for a very small data set. Until one day it asked me if I wanted the Python code to do so. And so I copied the Python code and put into a Python code site, and it ran the Python code and it asked for the data set and it calculated the mean perfectly. I was like, oh, this is different. This is ChatGPT actually being able to work with numbers fairly well. So I decided to expand upon what I would ask it to do. And right here, what you can see is specs for a program that I would want ChatGPT4o to create. And I'm giving these specs to ChatGPT4o to create, but I could also have given them to a human programmer and said, hey, like, could you create this for me? Here's what I'd like to have made. So after ChatGPT4o showed that it could calculate the mean of a data set, I asked it to calculate the standard deviation, and it could do that. And so I got into hypothesis testing. Well, can it do a single sample t-test or a z-test or pick the correct test? Can it tell me whether to retain or reject a null hypothesis? Can it create some plots of what the results look like? And in each of these cases, ChatGPT4o did a really good job. So here are these specs, and I'm going to give them to ChatGPT4o this time and ask it to create the program for me. So I've highlighted the specifications. I'm going to say copy. Here's ChatGPT4o, and I'm going to come to a new prompt, and I'm going to paste my specs. Now each time it creates a program based upon my specs, it's almost like it's trying it for the first time. So it may introduce some bugs when it goes and does this, or I may see its output and decide that I want to make some improvements upon it. And this works okay without me even needing to know the Python. If it creates an error when I run it, I just copy that error and I bring it back to ChatGPT4o and I say, hey, when I ran this code you gave me, I got this error. And I'll be like, oh, here's a correction. And so far, each time that it's giving me the correction, it has made it one step closer to running just fine. So here's the code that ChatGPT4o created for me. And so I can go ahead and just click the copy code. And now I have the Python code. So of course, I need a place to run it. And I have to say, I really like Replit as a site to run my Python code that's been generated by ChatGPT4o. So I'll go ahead and do a search on Replit, and here it is. And this is a site, and you can see I'm already logged in. It was free to create this account, and I've been working with the Replit, and it's very easy for me to use, at least compared to whatever else is out there. So I'm going to say create Python, and it wants me to give this a name, so I'll say hypothesis testing single sample, and tell it to create it. Okay, so it's ready to go now. I'll do Control V to paste the ChatGPT4o generated Python code. Right, so here's the Python code. I didn't have to write it. It's here. I still don't have to do anything with it, other than after having pasted it, click the Run button. Okay, so what this site is doing is it's setting up the environment to run this Python code. And for those of you who program with Python, you'll know that it's having to import some libraries. And fortunately, Replit has these libraries to work with, so I didn't have to worry about that. So it's installing everything, getting everything ready to run this Python program. And the first thing it's going to ask me is, what does the population mean? If you're going to do a hypothesis test, you want to know, like, hey, if nothing unusual is going on, what should the typical value be? So let's say I'm interested in whether smart water improves IQ. You go to the grocery store and you can buy the smart water. And so I'm going to recruit some subjects, 3 subjects, and I have IRB approval. That is, that they've looked it over, they decided it's ethical, and this participants agreed to participate. And so I'm going to go ahead and have them drink the smart water, and then I'll give them an IQ test. Well, if nothing unusual is going on, the average IQ is 100. So their score should be pretty close to 100. Now it says enter a comma separated list of data. So let's say for my 3 participants, an IQ of 105, an IQ of 110, and an IQ of 115. Now that looks kind of promising. These 3 scores are all above an average intelligence. I mean, it might have happened to randomly select 3 fairly bright people to begin with, so but we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter, and it says, is the population standard deviation known? Well, for IQ tests, they're actually designed for a particular mean and standard deviation, mean of 100, and in this case, standard deviation of 16. So I'll put that in there, and it says, okay, for those 3 data scores, the sample mean was 110. So again, that's above average, but is it above average enough to reject the null hypothesis that nothing special is going on here, right? The population standard deviation was 16, and I gave it that, so that's not a surprise. The standard error, so now we're getting to hypothesis testing, was 9.238. The z-test statistic, 1.083. Alpha level, 0.05. Z-critical is, in this case, plus or minus 1.96. The p-value is 0.279, so that's not particularly unusual. What that's saying is we could expect 3 values like the 105, 110, 115 to occur if the smart water was like nothing special, to get values that extreme 27.9% of the time. So the Python code says retain the null hypothesis, right? So that's pretty cool. So it's doing what SPSS, another stats program, might do. And it's giving it to me exactly as I've asked for it and what I've requested. And I didn't have to know Python coding to do that. I just gave it the specs of what I wanted. Then over here, you can see that I had it create 2 plots. The plot on the left shows what the distribution of scores will look like if the null hypothesis is correct. So there should be an average IQ of 100, with most of the scores in between this 84 to 116, and we can get a little bit more extreme. So with IQs of 105, 110, and 115, that's not making me doubt this model that smart water was actually useless, and these scores fit right where you would expect them to be if I just happen to randomly select 3 people and test their IQ. Over here on the right is a distribution of sample means, and it's showing me if the null hypothesis is correct, what that distribution will look like. So again, an average of 100. Our sample mean of 110 is right over here. And the more extreme a sample mean is, the more it gets our attention and makes us doubt the model. So if the model says like, hey, you could expect your sample means to be somewhere here in the middle, and let's say I got a sample mean that was way extreme, then I'd know, oh, this model doesn't fit very well. But in this case, a sample mean of 110 is, well, fairly run-of-the-mill. It's right there in the middle. And so I would retain the null. What I liked about this experience is I got to play with this at the level of writing specs that, I could be giving to my friend who codes in Python saying, hey, can you create this for me? Or I can do it through the ChatGPT4o. It creates the code, I put it in here, and I run it. And not only that, but there's even ways to then deploy this so that it becomes a public app that anyone can use. There'd be possibly a charge for it, so you have to look into that. But I can do this as an individual, and there's even a way potentially to then make this a public app that I could then post and have my students use. So I really enjoyed my foray into ChatGPT4o, putting together specs, having it create the Python code, and then running it. It was a fun process. It was iterative. I continued to make improvements to my specs, my prompt that is, and sometimes errors were created, and I told the ChatGPT4o what the error was, and it fixed the code. So a very good experience. I hope that you enjoy testing this out if you're so inclined, and have fun with it as well.